They laughed at my cheap dress, not knowing it cost more than their new car. I stood by the appetizer table, a glass of lukewarm champagne in my hand, and watched my Aunt Carol circle me like a vulture in a floral pantsuit. Her daughter, my cousin Jessica, whose engagement party this was, trailed behind her, a smaller, shinier version of the same bird of prey. Jessica's new fiancé had just bought her a gleaming white SUV, a monstrosity she'd parked diagonally across two spots outside, and the price tag of which had been the sole topic of conversation for the last hour. My dress, a simple, unadorned column of black silk with seams so perfect they were practically invisible, had no logos, no glitter, no desperate cry for attention. To them, invisible quality was the same as no quality at all. "Alina, darling," Aunt Carol began, her voice dripping with the fake sweetness that always preceded an attack. "That's a brave choice for an engagement party. A little funereal, don't you think?" Jessica giggled, a sound like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. "Mom, be nice. Maybe it's all she could afford." The conflict was as old as time, their loud, branded existence versus my quiet, curated one. I tried to deflect, offering a small smile. "I just wanted something comfortable." This was a mistake. It was like admitting defeat. "Oh, comfortable," Carol echoed, savoring the word as if it were an insult. "Well, comfort doesn't exactly scream celebration, does it?" The real choice wasn't about the dress. It was about whether I would finally break the family's unwritten rule: never, ever outshine Jessica. For years, I had downplayed my successes, muted my achievements, all to keep the peace. Tonight, wearing this dress was a quiet test, for myself. Could I simply exist in my own skin, in my own success, without their approval? The answer was becoming painfully clear. Just as I was about to murmur an excuse and escape to the patio, Aunt Carol reached into her oversized designer handbag. She pulled out a crumpled $100 bill. With a grand, theatrical gesture of pity that drew the eyes of everyone nearby, she pressed it into my hand. "Here, sweetie," she said in a stage whisper. "Go buy yourself something pretty for the wedding. Don't worry, this is our little secret." My fingers closed around the bill. It felt hot with my humiliation. My first instinct was to throw it back in her face, to tell her exactly what my dress was, who designed it, and what it represented. But I saw the circle of watching eyes, the smug satisfaction on Jessica's face, and the pained, helpless look from my own mother across the room. A scene would only prove their point, that I was classless, graceless, the poor relation who couldn't handle her station. So I made the choice I always made. I chose peace. I chose to fall. "Thank you, Aunt Carol," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "That's very generous." I folded the bill and slipped it into my clutch. The victory in her eyes was blinding. She patted my cheek, a gesture of dominance, not affection, and then swept away, Jessica in her wake, to regale another group with the story of her magnanimity. The rest of the hour was a slow-motion spiral into misery. Every conversation felt strained, every smile felt like pity. People who knew of my career in tech, a quiet but extremely lucrative venture I never discussed at family gatherings, now looked at me with confusion. Had they misheard? Was I not doing so well after all? Each attempt to engage in normal conversation was met with a gentle redirection, as if I were a child who couldn't possibly understand their talk of mortgages, European vacations, and country club memberships. I was no longer Alina, the niece or the cousin. I was a charity case. The absolute lowest point came when I saw my fiancé, Mark, talking to Jessica's new husband-to-be. Mark glanced over at me, and in his eyes, I saw not anger at my aunt, but a deep, gut-wrenching pity. For me, he thought I was wounded, helpless. In my attempt to avoid a scene, I had sacrificed his respect and my own. I felt a cold knot of despair tighten in my stomach. I had let them strip me down to nothing, and I had done it to myself. The time came for the gift presentation. Jessica and her fiancé sat on two throne-like chairs while guests lined up. I stayed back, my small, plain envelope feeling insignificant in my hands. As the pile of brand-name boxes grew, a man I didn't recognize approached me. He was impeccably dressed, older, with an air of quiet authority. "Forgive me for staring," he said, his voice a low, cultured murmur. "But I simply have to ask, is that a vintage Dubois?" I froze. No one in my family would know that name. "The Silent Night collection from his final Paris show?" he pressed, his eyes alight with genuine admiration. "I've only ever seen photographs." Before I could answer, he turned to the room, which had quieted down to listen. "Everyone," he announced with the casual command of someone used to being heard, "you are looking at a piece of fashion history, a true work of art." He was, as I would later learn, Julian Croft, a renowned fashion critic and a guest of the groom's family. He explained that there were only 3 such dresses made. One was in a museum. The other was owned by a European royal. "The last time one of these came up for a private auction," he concluded, looking directly at my aunt, "it sold for enough to buy that very impressive SUV outside. Twice." A wave of shocked silence washed over the room. It was perfect. It was my victory. But it lasted only a second. Aunt Carol, recovering with the speed of a cornered animal, saw a new angle of attack. The shock on her face melted away, replaced by a sharp, accusatory glare. "Alina!" she gasped, her voice ringing with false concern. "Why didn't you tell us? My goodness, where did you get something like that? You let us think... Oh, you poor thing. Are you in some kind of trouble? Did someone buy that for you?" The implication was ugly, immediate, and effective. The crowd's awe curdled into suspicion. Julian Croft's compliment was twisted into evidence of my supposed moral failing. I wasn't successful. I was a kept woman. I wasn't quiet. I was deceitful. I stood there, exposed and slandered, in my priceless dress, feeling cheaper than I ever had in my life. I had hit the bottom, and at the bottom, something shifted. I looked at my aunt's triumphant face and realized my mistake. For years, I had tried to be the bigger person by shrinking myself. But being the bigger person didn't mean being a doormat. It meant owning your space, your truth, without apology. The choice I should have made in the beginning was not between silence and anger. It was between their version of me and my version of me. With a newfound clarity, I walked toward the gift table. I picked up the microphone intended for the best man's speech. "Thank you, Julian, for your kind words," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying through the silent room. "And thank you, Aunt Carol, for your concern about my financial situation. Your gift of $100 earlier was... touching." I looked directly at her as a flush crept up her neck. It reminded me that the best gifts come from the heart and are meant to truly help someone. I then turned to Jessica, holding up the simple envelope. "Jessica, I was worried my gift wasn't flashy enough for you, but I hope it's helpful." She took it hesitantly, her eyes darting from me to her mother. She opened it. Inside wasn't a check, but a single document. Her face went blank, then pale. Her fiancé leaned over to read it, and his jaw dropped. "It's a certificate of mortgage payoff," I explained to the silent, watching guests. "For the new apartment you were so worried about affording. Consider it paid in full. An engagement gift." I placed the microphone back on the table. The silence was no longer shocked. It was damning. Aunt Carol's face had crumpled. Jessica looked at the paper in her hands, then at her mother, a dawning, horrified understanding in her eyes. The entire foundation of their social standing, built on judging the value of things they didn't understand, had just been demolished. I didn't wait for a reaction. I turned and walked out of the party, leaving them in the wreckage. As the cool night air hit my face, I realized the dress wasn't a statement about money. It was a statement about worth. Some things, like dignity, simply weren't for sale. And theirs, it seemed, had just been foreclosed on.